Dr. Norton.
All right, no problem.
All right, boom. We're good to go. Yeah, you
Yeah,
got a podcast. You gotta let me know what's up.
yeah, I got a sports podcast, and so we haven't recorded in a while. So I took all this stuff down, and then I'm looking at the camera. I'm like, yo, this thing is not doing what I wanted to do, and so I kind of re-put some of the stuff back up a little while ago because the other camera was a bit grainy. So I kind of set it back up a little bit, but so I was doing some troubleshooting stuff on that side of things. So that's why it kind of looked like, you know what I'm saying?
I mean, you got the business. I mean, I didn't. First of all, I didn't even know that you had a podcast. So you're gonna, fill me in on that
Yeah.
later. And I'm feeling like I'm lagging behind. You got the whole Breakfast Club microphone set up.
Nah. I
Angela Yee
wouldn't go with that, man. You said what?
Like I'm about to see Angela Yee and Charlamagne the God real quick.
Nah, they're not gonna come out today. I can promise you that. Nah, but yeah, no. So I had to set up for a minute. Like me and my brother, we got after it with from a podcast standpoint. So I went out, we bought equipment, put it all together, things of that nature. So I mean, this is the perfect thing to use it for, if you ask me. So I had it sitting around, and you know, I just put it to use. It's already set up there, so I didn't have to do too much.
Well, that's what's up. I mean, you came ready for sure, man. So I mean, it looks good, and shoot, that's good to know. That means we can get right into the flow of things.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Basically, want to introduce you, everybody. This is Dr. Norton. I'm gonna let Dr. Norton introduce himself, but Spark Pro Rehab, correct?
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about Spark Pro, what you do, how long you've been doing it.
Okay. All right, here we go. So I started this company a few years ago, and so by default, I'm a sports chiropractor. I'll go through a little bit of some of my degrees and how I got to this point and where I'm at, what my goal is, and what I like to do and what I want to talk about a little bit, right? So as a former athlete, I realized that there was not much around for athletes to do as far as injury prevention, rehabilitation protocol that didn't include typical everyday PTs, athletic trainers, and coaches or staff members that may know how to do some simple things, right? So I came into the picture of my undergrad degree. First and foremost is in kinesiology, exercise science. I got a minor degree in biology. Decided to go to chiropractic school where I got my chiropractic degree from Life University, and I got my master's degree also in functional rehab and sports health science. So basically, I put all this stuff together as a former athlete myself to get to a point to say, what can we do to prevent injuries from happening? And so it led me down this long path of I enjoy working on athletes, and my goal is to make sure that they can stay up and running as long as they can. The one taboo word or the one word that scares most people is injuries. And they suck. Nobody wants to have an injury, and if they do have an injury, they only care about a few things. How long is it going to take for me to rehab from this thing, and can I make it to the next game tomorrow? Is this going to stop me from getting a scholarship? Is this going to stop me from making millions of dollars? This is going to stop me from making a travel ball team. And so with that being said, I realized that the biggest thing that stops most athletes is that taboo word of injury. And I got to that point of saying, how can I maximize performance, minimize injury, make sure my athletes are, patients are getting the best care that's possible out there, and that they know different avenues that they can actually attack to stay on the field, stay on the pitch, stay on the court, whatever it is you want to do. I want to make sure that you can make it to do that thing. So if I want to get my 40 down to, 4.6, 4.5, 4.4, but I can't because I keep pulling hamstrings or my knees jacked up or my hips jacked up, like that's where I come into play, and that's kind of the stuff that I work on and I identify.
So basically, you're a magician.
Some would say. I've had people walk into my office and say, "Hey, this is the first time I've seen you. I got a hip injury. I also got a game tomorrow." I don't know what to do with that stuff right there. That's a lot of pressure to put on somebody you just meet, other than like Facebook reviews or stuff that people say, "Hey, go check this guy out." Am I able to do things like that? Yes. Is that common? I would say it's an in between, you know what I'm saying? It's depending on the severity of the injuries, depending on the severity of the athlete, where they are in their career. If you're like, get ready to go back to the woodshed because you're an older guy and you've had, tons and tons of injuries and things like that, it might take a little longer than one visit for me to fix something like that, but it could easily be, you could be up and going just that quick. So, I mean, it's really dependent. Am I a magician? People say I do magic-like stuff. I get stuff done.
Modest. You sounding modest right now.
I try to be. I mean, I don't want to, the biggest thing is I don't want to sell somebody a dream that I can fix something and they might need some advanced imaging or things of that nature. It's like, I thought you was a dude that can fix it. So I try to be transparent. Every patient, athlete, it's a case-by-case basis. So, I mean, if you come in with something that may look like plantar fasciitis and I fix your ankle, it probably wasn't. You may think I'm a magician, but if you got a hip that you've been running on for 3 years and you need to get back out in a week and a half and it might take me 2 weeks to fix it, you may say I'm taking too long. So,
Of course, no, yeah, I'm just giving you, I'm just pulling you a little bit. But, we talk about injuries, and I know that you do a lot of work with high school athletes. Let's talk, can we talk a little bit more? Let's talk a little bit more about, the athletic landscape at the high school level, because, being myself, a strength and conditioning coach and working in the private sector with a lot of these kids who are coming from their high school, and you hear about the type of training programs that they have at their school and the type of injuries that they're facing year in and year out. And some of these injuries, in my opinion, are pretty easily avoidable if, some of these things were caught early on. And one of the things that I talk about a lot with parents and my athletes as well is them having like a proper, assessment protocol going into a season, and a proper training program that actually uses periodization and kind of takes into account where each athlete is on an individual basis versus trying to fit the athlete to the program rather than the program to the athlete. And I know it's tough to do with a lot of kids, but at the end of the day, there's a higher incident of injury if certain things aren't addressed. So, I mean, what is your thoughts on that? And what do you see that's pretty common amongst the athletes that you work with as far as root causes and that sort of deal?
Good question. So, one, I think I enjoy the stuff that you do just as much as you enjoy the stuff that I do. And one reason that I'll tell you that I enjoy the stuff that you do is, one, because I don't see these guys every single day. Now, a lot of trainers that, I've been around, like far as me being an athlete, an ex-athlete myself, to some of the common trainers that I may see today that I see that they don't take that personal time to individualize a treatment protocol or a workout protocol for an athlete, Like you say, it's not a cookie cutter system. So I can't put it in words of what you do so differently than other people, other than you make sure that they can get the best out of themselves. So I appreciate that. Now, one thing that I do see on the other side of the fence is that people don't know this health industry from an athletic standpoint. So typically some of the things that I will see is that athletes typically get stuck into a school system that may consist of, I see my athletic trainer, and my athletic trainer refers me to a physical therapist, or they refer me to an orthopedic surgeon. I typically get put in the system of, I'm seeing the best because the best may say, hey, we got X, Y, and Z logo on our back, our shirt. We've seen X, Y, and Z. So you think that the care that you're getting is top notch. Mm-hmm. From my side of the fence, one of the things that I try to do is I look at each individual athlete, and I like to start with a basic functional movement assessment to see, can you even do simple things? And typically what I see is most athletes don't know how their body's moving, performing, or functioning, recovering to any degree. And so what I like to do is say, hey, how can I put you in a state or a shape that your body can actually do the best that it needs to do? So typically some of the stuff that I see may be an ankle injury, right? Mm-hmm. Said athlete may have had a hip injury 2 weeks prior to that. That causes X, Y, and Z. I think I'm rambling a little bit here. I'll be honest. And I can literally get off on a tangent. And so the outside market, one of the biggest things is that most youth accidents or injuries, they go unreported. So let's say that you're out on a pitch, you sprain ankle, the ankle didn't get reported, the hip 2 weeks ago didn't get reported, you're in a game, and next thing you know, you tore your ACL. They're like, well, how the heck did that happen? I didn't even know I had these injuries. But the small underlying things typically lead to the bigger issues that people face that turns into a lot of chronic stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about an industry where it's $9 to $15 billion that are being passed around for care, right? And most of these guys aren't putting treatment protocols into place to kind of say, what can I do to avoid certain stuff? So from a pre-injury standpoint, from a preseason standpoint, I think that most athletes should be screened for a functional movement assessment by a trained professional like myself or as many other people out here that do this types of thing that say, hey, what is my body functioning like before the season starts? So I don't know. I know you're probably familiar with this. At the beginning of the season, they do pretty much a concussion protocol, right?
Mm-hmm.
For contact sport guys and say, hey, where's my body at from a contact sport? Am I more prone to concussions? Where's my baseline levels? When we talk about muscles and joints and things like that, that actually fuel the system and get the system moving, we aren't checking these things to start out, right? So you take a kid that may have been sitting on his couch playing Fortnite on his Xbox for 6 months. He says, I know I got soccer season coming up. I'm going to train for 2.5 weeks. Coach said, hey, you guys should have been doing blah, 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 blah. Next thing you know, said athlete goes out there. Coach says, do this thing. And he pulls a hamstring. He's been sitting on the couch. Coach said, you should be able to do this. You've been resting up. He pulls a hamstring. Now he's stuck in this cycle. Did we check his hamstrings before that? Did we check his hip flexors? Did we check his knees? Did we check any of this stuff? No. But from a concussion side, we make sure the brain's working perfectly okay, but we're not checking the thing that actually fuels the machine, such as muscles and, nervous system and things of that nature. So that's some of the stuff that I also look at too.
Of course, and it makes perfect sense. And, given that you're a specialist at what you do, working with athletes like this, and you have such a detailed protocol as far as screening and being able to assess appropriately, what type of assessment protocol would you recommend for a coach who might not, they don't know about Dr. Norton just yet. And, the saying goes, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
What kind of is there like a basic like screen test that you would recommend that coaches can do to say, hey, look, you didn't do this right. Maybe you should fall back on this. I mean, and I know that there's more than just one way, but is there like a simple one that,
right.
I
think if I was a coach and I was in a game for 2 months, 6 months, 25 years, I would look for a professional that's going to do more of a functional movement assessment screening on their athletes. My personal screening is a little more in depth than what you would get from just a movement assessment, because I have the doctorate side of things to kind of like actually look at certain things that most people wouldn't know what they're looking at. So I would tell coaches to think about putting a system in place to actually protect your athletes that it's going to be more along the lines of, are all my players checked to some degree to make sure that things are moving good, like just from a mobility standpoint, right? So if you have someone that's a catcher that that plays baseball to some degree, and they're down in this crouching position for 90% of the season, I have to make sure that their hips are just moving to some degree correctly. Like, I wouldn't say, are your hips hurting? Because typically pain and function and structure are 3 different things that react totally different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be a little more aware of a coach of what do I need to do to make sure that I'm getting the best out of my players. So whether that's like a high-end physical therapist, athletic trainers that have more than just an athletic trainer degree to some degree. So like they may have been some type of massage therapist or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or I'd find a sports-based performance doctor like myself. I'm a sports chiropractor. So I kind of look at the smallest of movements, and I'm checking the tiniest things, and small, tiny things typically turn into big things. So I would tell coaches, let's try to put a team in place of professionals that are going to be aware. I mean, even to the standpoint of a trainer like yourself, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, and like I said, one of the reasons I enjoy working with you is because you're aware of most of your athletes and how their body should move and function and how things should actually work. And you're like, listen, this is out of my realm right here. I'm going to pass this on to somebody else that can get the results done. And that's okay, because someone says, hey, what's going on with my form? I'm going to say, hey, that's out of my realm. Do I know some stuff about it? But I'm sending this to somebody that knows a professional. And I'm like, yo, your gate's off because blah, 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 blah. display that message to me, or you give me that message, and then we make a big symbiotic unit that actually doesn't do anything for us, but it gets the results that we need. So the athlete's getting the speed and agility stuff, they're getting specific things that they need on that side, and they're making sure their body is actually running at a high level to kind of get the output. So that's kind of what I would suggest for coaches. So surround yourself with a group of people that are a little more in tune with the body, and they actually see some stuff every day that they can identify deficiencies or issues that may actually be lurking in an athlete that they have no clue what's going on.
100. I mean, yeah.
I mean, the funny thing is, I saw a patient. This was probably a few weeks ago. She came in with knee pain. Okay, I didn't work on her knee at all. I didn't touch her knee. What was going on? Her quads weren't firing correctly, right? So, I mean, the thing is, you have to be able to identify, like, my knee's hurting. It's not, some of that stuff is typically not that type of issue. So, I mean, she was happy, I was happy. Her coach was like, good job. But I mean, her parents was like, hey, let's put her in the system, or let's put her someplace, or take her to someone that's qualified to identify things like this. And I mean, she went to hospitals in the areas or other PTs in the area, and that's just what the results were. So
that's what you got to do. And I've always had this concept about sports doctors and chiropractors who are familiar with working with athletes. I always thought it was really cool how it's more of a global approach to things versus isolating it down to one thing, because you have a lot of people would think when you have an athlete coming in and saying that, oh, I have knee pain, want to go straight to that knee and see what's going on. And the traditional train of thought is put ice on it, put a little stem on it, just ice the knee, ibuprofen, stuff like that. But then
work on it, get the knee muscles stronger, blah blah blah.
They get the knee muscles stronger, do more squats and whatnot. But a lot of the times, like you said, you can see that sometimes it's just a muscle that's not firing, or something is off on the opposite side of the body that's causing you to compensate, which I think is really cool in your approach as far as really being able to see the detail in an athlete and not just, taking a magnifying glass and looking under a microscope at one specific point, really putting everything in a bubble and saying, okay, this is what's going on with the knee. Let's check this out and see, because this is a common cause. So that's really cool. And that's my whole approach to things.
Yeah, no. So one of the guys, his name is Gary Cook. He's been doing some of this stuff from a functional movement standpoint for 15, 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. And his thing is, we should look at some of this stuff globally. And I think that for as trainers to some degree, physical therapists to some degree, athletic trainers more so, they should look at the body as a global unit as opposed to one individualized issue. Now, could something be going on in that individual area? Mm-hmm. Probably so, but we also probably got other things that may or may not be working, and those are typically what I see most of the times that are typically missed on a global scale.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. That's why we have eagles in the sky like yourself to be able to point those things out. Which also, leads me to my next question, because you mentioned before about the athletes sitting down playing Fortnite and then all of a sudden going into the season and pulling a hamstring. Let's say that you're a psychic and you can see the future, okay? Because we're going to talk about what's going on right now. We know everybody's on Corona vacation and people are at home. Some of the kids are at home and they have their assignments that they do for school and stuff like that. But right now, pretty much everybody's on lockdown. You can't get out and do as much as you normally would with school activity, and, sports season and stuff was canceled. Right. Let's say hypothetically, this is done in another 3 weeks, 4 weeks. What do you see happening to these athletes who are coming off of pretty much a 6-week hiatus from playing sport, and then all of a sudden going back into their summer travel teams and doing all of that? What's one thing that you would anticipate happening to these kids?
I see an increase in injuries by the boatload. One, because we already have a bunch of athletes that typically are doing something. In my opinion, it's a bit of overuse in the amount of time that they're actually spending training, and whether they're doing games or travel ball, like they're just already doing a ton of that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
their body's already in my professional and personal opinion, is already at a deficit of functioning at a level. So you
Mm-hmm.
go to a dormant state of not doing anything, and you try to ramp it back up like you didn't miss a beat, then you're gonna hurt yourself to some degree. So, like I said, one of my biggest things is making sure right now from being out. I guess we'll call this an off season, right? A mandatory off season.
Mandatory off
Right?
season. Yes.
So we'll call this during this off season. If this was during a regular football, basketball, baseball, track, equestrian, swimming, you name it, lacrosse, you would have some type of off-season plan that you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be working with folks like myself and folks like yourself to say, hey, I want to make sure I'm still in the gym. I'm working on some fundamental things in my game that may be lacking, whether that's speed, whether that's mobility, whether that's explosiveness, and I'm also going to make sure I'm getting my body checked and screened, and I'm putting my personal team together of, doctors, therapists that's going to actually make sure that I'm in control of my health, and that or my kid or my mom, what I'm saying, that I'm in control of what's going on with my body. Like, I think that's probably, this is probably a very awesome time to kind of get in front of some of the underlying issues that you may have been having from off season, through season, postseason, things of that nature, and making sure that you can get your body up and running. So, I mean, during our unofficial off season, I'd be working on some of those things. So I'm hitting the gym with some of the best trainers in the area. I'm working with, some of the best doctors around town. I'm making sure I'm putting my personal team together, because I don't want to. If I was an athlete, I wouldn't want to rely on a school appointed official or trainer
Yeah.
to give me guidance when they have to see 120 other kids. I just think that the quality of care to that degree may suffer a little.
Mm-hmm.
So as an athlete, I'm putting my own personal team together that I know they're going to take care of me. I mean, that's how we see the big wigs like LeBron James and Tom Brady make it through, 20 seasons, 16 seasons. They have their own personal teams, whether that's a chef, masseuse, acupuncturist, nutritionist, things of that nature. Like they've all put their team together that keeps them up and running. So if I'm in high school and I'm trying to get to college, I'm in college and trying to get to the pros, I'm in the pros and I'm trying to stay there for a long time, and injury not be the thing, then you have to build your own team. You got to put your team together. That's going to be what's going to get you through, versus depending on a team or organization to do that.
Almost definitely. There's an old book from childhood. It takes a village to raise a child.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. You gotta
need a
have
sports village. You need a sports village, man.
You damn right. You gotta have your nutritionist. You gotta have your sports specialist. You gotta have your performance specialist, and you got your skills coach, and you got your head coach. So it takes a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. I mean, we, these injuries and stuff happen. I'm always preaching about it, and I think it's so important to be in balance mechanically before you do anything. And you have some parents and some athletes who are not really realistic. Sorry, they're not really realistic about their performance expectations in terms of, I want to hurry up and get fast really quick, or I need to hurry up and get strong without addressing the small things first. And me and you, we talked about this before. I have kids. I've seen kids that work with kids before who, if we're talking about a baseline assessment, doing like an overhead squat, like you see some things, it's just not, it's out of whack. And to overload this kid with this type of drill and this type of exercise and expect this to happen without any type of injury happening, I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. So, I mean,
100%.
Yeah,
That's one of the things that I don't enjoy, 15, 16, 17, 18, you feel invincible, but that's the critical time where you need to be getting your body worked on, because you're also developing, muscles are growing, you're getting bigger, taller, faster, stronger. So you're going to have more imbalances in your body than, you would actually think that exist. So that's one of the things that I typically see is it's a people don't want to talk about it, but it's real until it happens to you, and they chalk injuries up as a part of the game. But if you can do something to limit these things from happening, then I definitely take advantage of that, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And I think now with so much advance going in into the performance training segment of the professional athlete, and we slowly starting to see a trickle down into the high school levels. Not quite there yet, but I mean, what you start to see, and at the most elite of elite, is you see a lot more of these schools and these top elite schools, these professional organizations pouring a lot of money into the sports science department, which is not necessarily like strength and conditioning, sports science. So they want to have a way to keep tabs on how this athlete is performing. I mean, down to the T, and to have some teams where they have the trackers on is telling you if they're faster on their right side versus left side, and then you can transfer that data over to the strength coach and the head coach and get together and say, okay, he ran slower during the third quarter and he was cutting slower off his left side. We need to strengthen this during this week or let him rest this much. And it comes more about being so precise and reducing the incidence of injury that it's obviously a significant, important investment for. If it's that important to do at an elite level, it's especially important to do at the adolescent level where the body is going through these changes, the bones and stuff are going through all these alterations with the growth and the tendon structure and how these kids move. I think that's probably the most important time to be assessed during this period, this window of life, because how you adjust and how you load yourself being an athlete going through that phase will literally set you up for the rest of your life. Like
Exactly.
it will literally set
And
you up for the rest of your life.
right, you also take in the consideration of the workload that these guys are trying to do to, make sure that they can get to the next level and set that next level, then, that's even more critical, So the last thing you want to do is say, hey, I've done 6 to 8 months of training with somebody, and next thing you know, I blew a hamstring that's gonna put me down. So I mean, you pretty much did all that work and putting all that time in the gym to just to sit on the sideline, So
Okay.
that's what I don't want to see.
No, we don't want to see that. We don't want
No,
to see.
we all know that guy riding a bicycle that can't stay healthy.
Yeah, you know what? That was me back in the day. That was me, and that's how I learned. So that's that. And you talk about, we mentioned sitting on the sideline. You said the word sitting, and when we spoke actually yesterday, we talked about um, dynamic versus uh,
Isometric stretching.
isometric stretches. And so tell me if this rings a bell, how many times you've heard this. Yeah, my son, he's just so not flexible. Like I bend over, I can touch my toes and he can't touch his toes. And so I stretch his hamstrings out and he's just not getting flexible. So I mean, do you have any stretches that he can do? And I think the idea of it is when when a kid pulls a muscle, I say, for instance, they pull a hamstring muscle, and then immediately let's go stretch out the hamstring. I have a tight, I have a tight hamstring. Something's wrong with my hamstring. I have a tight, so I need to stretch. I need to stretch it. My high school trainer is going to tell me to put ice on it, maybe do some stem and rest ice compression, which is all good. But the concept of having a pulled hamstring and a tight muscle is automatic. That okay, I need to sit there and just stretch out my hamstring. What can you please walk us through the difference between being flexible isometrically and then being dynamically flexible?
So from an isometric standpoint, let's say that I got this pen in my hand, right? And if this pen it's got a little rubber piece on it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I can take that rubber piece and I can pull it like this. You can see I can pull this rubber piece like this, hold it for 5, 10 seconds, let it go. It's just going to go right back to it being 2 inches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's more of an isometric stretch. You can just pull it, it'll feel good. It's going to go back to it being 2 inches. Now, from a dynamic standpoint, if I take this thing and I hold on to this little rubber piece on this pen for about 10, 15 minutes and I kind of pull it, let it go, pull it, let it go, pull it, let it go. What's that's going to do is it's going to start to allow muscles that have been shortened to some degree or contracted to
Mm-hmm.
elongate in a fashion where they're actually warming up, which means that the muscles become a little more flexible, The muscle then becomes a little more pliable, which in turn this means that the muscle is going to have less give or resistance from ripping off of a bone or pulling or tearing, which is going to decrease injury. So from a dynamic standpoint, what you want to do is get muscles to warm up faster than 15, 20, 30 seconds. That may take 10, 15, 20 minutes per muscle group to some degree, you know? And so it's like, I'm not going to hop in my car and gun it at 25 degrees outside up the street. You know, I'm going to let that engine warm up a little bit, because if you just go out there and say, ram the engine up a couple of times and take off, then you might throw a piston. You know what I'm saying? You might tear something up because you didn't allow the machine enough proper time to actually warm up and get to where it needs to be. So isometrically, you're just saying ram, versus you need to say, I'm gonna let this baby sit and let it gradually get nice temperature on it so it can actually get all the parts lubricated so everything can work. So when I take off, it's gonna take off nice and smooth, and then you can ramp it up down the street if you want to. It's gonna be warmed up and ready to go. So most kids are just revving their engine versus letting the thing warm up. If that kind of answer your question a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's such an amazing analogy. It's a great analogy. And it's, again, I think it's one of those things too that's going to take a little bit of time for the actual, the science and everything to seep over into adolescence. Because you still see before games that, all right, down the right, touch your toes, 5, 4, 3, 2, left side down. It does. And I was joking before about how I was that guy who was on the sideline on the bicycle a lot. It's just ironic because if I sat down and touched my toes or did any of these kind of stretches or did like yoga and stuff like this, like I was extremely flexible. Like I can touch my toes and stuff all day, but I was still pulling the hell out of my muscles sometimes. So, I mean, there's a difference. There's a difference between being able to stand there and reach versus doing that same type of muscle lengthening, actually going through a motion. And I think that's kind of where I was ignorant to the fact in the day that this is probably something I should have worked more on. And this is why we do what we do now, Dr. Norton.
Definitely. And so I think the biggest thing, and you asked me this question early on, is you said, where do we start? We start with coaches being educated enough to say, hey, I'm not as savvy in this area as I want to be, but I want to make sure my team can stay healthy. So one, coaches typically spend the most time with these guys. You know what I'm saying? They're seeing them 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week for a couple hours. So they're seeing them in action, So coaches that are educated or want to be a little more savvy in how they actually approach their athletes from a treatment standpoint, because if they said, I did this like this when I was when I was an athlete and my coach did this, we're passing along something from 1960, and that's just not the way we should train anymore, So it starts at the top with coaches being aware, like, hey, I know I don't have a good treatment. I don't have a good stretching protocol in place for my athletes. I kind of do 1, down, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, change legs. All right, let's go. And if we change this thing from it being an isometric stretch to a dynamic stretch, then you could probably see some of the functional inabilities that some of your kids may have just from running up and down a field. They're like, listen, we've done this for 5 days in a row. It takes us 12 minutes to get through this one drill, and his right leg still don't go up like it needs to. And when he's going out there running, he's dragging it in the dirt. That ain't going to be good for us at some point in time. So then that sends them over to somebody like yourself. That sends them over to somebody like me to kind of, be in that stopgap to say, hey, let's see what's really going on with his leg, because we know the muscles are warmed up. Do we have a mobility issue? Are they not firing like they need to? Are they actually weak? Are they typically injured? Is there something else going on in the system? Is it a back issue? Is it something in a knee? You start to look at those types of things. And I mean, you can probably see, but some of the stuff you're like, I don't really know what to do. Dr. Norton, have at it, right? And so that's just kind of how we eliminate that stuff from the top, because if we keep on using the same old stuff from 1960, then we're never going to fix it. That's why we're in 2020 now, when guys are still putting heat and ice on stuff to kind of take care of stuff from.
Yeah, it's not working like that.
No.
But yeah, Dr. Norton, man, I appreciate you hopping on the call with me. I think we need to make this something that we're doing regular, because between athlete, yourself, myself, parent, there's too many topics to discuss that we definitely can't capture in 40, 45 minutes. So,
no, we haven't even got to the tip of the iceberg yet.
Nah, not even close. Not even close, man. But I'll tell you what, though, I appreciate your time and coming on and keeping everybody informed. There's a reason why I refer to you. A lot of my athletes, man, because you're just on top of it, and the passion it seeps through everything that you do, and the knowledge is incredible. So I appreciate your time, and thank you for helping out my kids whenever I send them your way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I send my athletes your way too. I'm like, listen, we got so much more we can get out of you. Like, I mean, I typically ask them what their goals are. Are you just trying to be a casual guy? Or are you trying to make it to the next level? And 90% say, I want to go to the next level. My next question is, how do you get to the next level? Well, you ain't going to get it like, you ain't going to get it sitting on the couch. Like, Michael Jordan, one of the best basketball players, had to work harder than everybody else to get to that point, So Kobe, like, listen, we got to put it in some way, somewhere, how, and you're the dude that gets people there.
Well, yeah, you damn right. I appreciate it too, man. And that's what it takes, And it's one thing when these kids say they want to get to the next level, but it's another thing to understand what it takes. And I hope to be more like a facilitator in terms of helping them realize that at that point. So, but until next time, Dr. Norton, I appreciate you again for coming on. I'm gonna wrap it up for the night, and we're gonna keep this thing going.
Yeah, definitely. So anybody that's still tuning in, listeners, if you guys got any questions, just shoot it to myself or Coach Willis, and then we'll definitely address those things next time we get on here.
Yeah, once again, this is Dr. Norton of Spark Pro Rehab. Make sure you hit him up if you have any type of performance issue, injury. He is the man. Can you tell us again where your office is located?
I'm located at 6110 Pine Mountain Road in Kennesaw, Georgia, Suite 201. Easy number to find, 678-902-7900.
All right, that's Dr. Norton. Dr. Norton, thanks again, man.
Thank you, Coach Willis. Until next time.
Yes, sir.